Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Christy Lero. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student at the School of Social Work, at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University in St. Louis. My background is in hospice and palliative care. Received my MSW and did hospice and palliative care in the community for 6 years. And then during that time also got clinical supervision and became a licensed clinical social worker and was in private practice as a therapist for 2 years, and decided I still wasn't satisfied with the the information that was out there. And so I decided to go back to school for a PhD. So here we are. I specialize in caregiver well-being for people with rare neurodegenerative diseases. And so thank you so much for the opportunity to come speak with you all today. I really appreciate your time and attention. So a couple disclosures and acknowledgments. I don't have any conflicts of interest, but I do want to acknowledge that my work is supported in part by the National Institutes of Health, specifically the National Institute of Mental Health. So I'd like to start off trying something a little bit different if we could try something together. If you all could get as comfortable as possible, and you're welcome, this isn't a meditation practice necessarily, it's just kind of a thought experiment and exercise, but get as comfortable as possible. And if you prefer to close your eyes, you can. You certainly don't have to, but it could help in kind of bringing some things to mind. So I'd like you to think of a friend or a family member and really think about when the last time you spoke to them was. When was the last time you saw them? How do you feel when you're with this person? Just kind of really try and experience those feelings of that individual. And I'm going to read off a couple of statements, and I just kind of want you to think about how often these statements are or are not true. When this person is experiencing suffering, I can be a bit cold-hearted toward them. I'm intolerant and impatient toward the aspects of their personality that I don't like. When they're feeling down, I try to approach their feelings with curiosity and openness. And I try to see their feelings as part of the human condition, or in other words, we're all human. So just kind of thinking about how often those statements may or may not be true. And now I want to kind of switch things a little bit to think of yourself. Bring yourself in your mind's eye. Imagine kind of looking in the mirror. Um, you know what it's like to be in your own skin, but really settle into it. And I'm going to do the same thing. Ask you a couple of, state a couple of sentences, and just think about how often those things are true or not true. When I am experiencing suffering, I can be a bit cold-hearted toward myself. I'm intolerant and impatient toward aspects of my personality that I don't like. When I'm feeling down, I try to approach my feelings with curiosity and openness. And finally, I try to see my feelings as a part of the human condition. We're all human. So I'm curious what you all might have noticed having done that exercise, the same statements, the same prompt. How often do you feel these things are true or not true? And what might you have noticed in general about kind of how you approached your friend or your family member with those statements? And was it the same or different than how you maybe thought of yourself when you were imagining yourself in your mind's eye and kind of how you react toward your own personal suffering? And just kind of think about why that might be. That's kind of the foundation of what we're going to dive into a little today. Self-compassion is a component of one of two survival systems that humans have developed over time. The first system we hear about often, it's that defense system, fight, flight, or freeze. When we feel threatened, we use one of these three mechanisms to stay safe. But the other system we don't hear about as often, and that's the care system. It involves compassion, support, and kindness. And when those around us are suffering, we use these mechanisms in support for other folks. So when those around us are suffering, we engage these three mechanisms. A friend might experience a hardship and we offer encouragement. We say kind things, might start a meal train, all those kinds of things. But when we feel threatened, we end up engaging the defense system instead of the care system. And in doing so, that can lead to isolation, depression, anxiety, and all kinds of distress, not just for the person that's suffering, but then also for those around us. So for health, and even in the healthcare field and in the wake of an illness, this can really affect individuals with illness. So, that isolation component happens quite a bit. And for caregivers as well, there's a lot of relational distress. You're not relating to yourself or to others in the same way. And even for healthcare providers and healthcare teams, this can lead to guilt. And this is one of the factors that leads into burnout. So today we're going to be focusing most on this compassion piece, but really the whole care system, compassion, support, and kindness. That's what we're really going to see how we can shift from this defense over to the care system. So in terms of what we know about self-compassion and the impact that it has on people, I've kind of divided up things that have come up in the literature about self-compassion based on someone living with an illness, caregivers and care partners, and healthcare providers. So we know through the literature that self-compassion is able to diminish some things, but then also enhance other things. So these practices really kind of change the way that we're able to see the world and ourselves in it. So for example, people living with illness that practice self-compassion experience diminished anxiety, depression, shame, loneliness, stress. But then it enhances things like social capital, the people that you're able to network and socialize with, self-soothing capabilities, mindfulness, compassion, even our causal reasoning abilities, be able to kind of give ourselves some what we call cognitive space from a situation and kind of reason things out in a different manner, psychosocial and spiritual wellness, and even courage. Similarly, care partners, a practice of self-compassion diminishes similar things. Burden, poor coping strategies, depression and anxiety, that's kind of the thread throughout. We see a lot of that, psychological distress, fatigue, and then even the things that are perceived to be stressful for folks. Yet the same self-compassion practices enhance things like self-efficacy, how effective you feel that you are at in varying roles, mindfulness, different forms of coping, and then quality of life overall. And lastly, healthcare professionals, self-compassion practices diminish a risk of burnout and secondary traumatic stress, then enhances the capability for self-care, kind of the willingness and ability to create space for self-care, mindfulness practices, and then professional quality of life as well, although I would be hard pressed to see that personal quality of life isn't also enhanced. But So far, this is what we know the impact of self-compassion could be. And all of those things sound lovely, but how do we do this? How do we shift from I'm feeling threatened and rather than using the defense mechanisms that we know, those fight, flight, or freeze? What does it look like? How do we do this? Tapping into the care system. So, to activate self compassion, one of the strategies that's used is asking yourself, what do I need right now? And what do I need right now could mean I need a break. I need to call a friend. I need to ask for help. I need to cut myself some slack. It could mean a lot of different things. The hardest part about that is really teasing apart how we actually do it and how we actually engage and taking a moment to pause. Well, really, that starts with this over identification, this mindfulness piece, right? So we'll go a little deeper into each of these components. The first one is this mindfulness piece. It's really grounding yourself and being, you know, being where you are and allowing yourself to be aware of what's happening within you. So taking a deep breath, counting to 5, box breathing. That's a practice of mindfulness where you count in for 4 breaths and then or 4 counts and then out for 4 counts, these kinds of grounding exercises. And just check in with yourself. What feelings do I need to notice? What feelings are coming up? What are am I feeling afraid? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling excited even? So just kind of noticing what's coming up and maybe even where it's showing up in your body. If you feel differences in your chest or shoulders. We tend to hold stress and tension in our upper body quite a bit. And then the next thing is, what do you need right now in terms of kindness? What would be a supportive or kind thing for you in that moment? Um, and I'm a social worker by trade, and in social work practice, we start with the basic needs. What is the most supportive thing that you need right now? Do you have your most basic needs? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? What is your temperature like? Do you need a sweater or to take off a layer? Just kind of checking in with yourself with those things as well. And then even beyond that, what else would be supportive for me? How else could I support myself in this situation? Is it tackling it alone? Is it calling a professional? Those kinds of things. And that kind of feeds into the next step then which is common humanity versus isolation. So a lot of times in this defense system, this fight, flight, or freeze, that's where really the isolation piece comes from. We feel like we're kind of all alone in this. But we don't come into this world alone. We don't exist in this world alone, and we certainly don't leave it alone. So who's in your community that you can talk to, that you can reach out to? And this isn't prescriptive by any means. It's not a linear progression, 1, 2, 3, even though it's numbered that way. These are just the components of it. And so any one of these things will help you sort of start to shift into directing a path to better well-being by checking into this care system. And then I think something that if you're unable to do that for yourself, like in the exercise we had just a minute ago, to really look in the mirror and kind of visualize yourself, sometimes what's helpful is to ask what your best friend, a loving family member, a child, or the child version of yourself, what they might tell you to do. Because they tend to give you the MGI, the most generous interpretation. And so that's really what this is about, is kind of refocusing to that most generous interpretation of the events, what's going on. So to give a couple of more clear-cut examples of what it looks like with this self-talk piece of shifting from defense to care, some of the things that would be what's called over-identification, or you're really kind of highly attached to the situation. is telling yourself, oh, I'm depressed, or I'm a bad caregiver, or I should have caught that. A good healthcare professional would have caught that. Um, and so you can see that these are really kind of attaching your identity, kind of hooking your whole identity to something that isn't an identity, right? That these things are emotions or just circumstance. So how do we do that shift? What does that change look like? So from I'm depressed to I'm feeling pretty down right now. That's where you can really see the mindfulness piece come in, is what feeling or what emotion is coming up, and then saying, okay, I'm feeling those things right now, but that's not who I am as a person. Similarly, I'm a bad caregiver. Heck no, caregiving is hard and I'm feeling it really intensely right now. And that's a normal part of caregiving. I should have caught that. Healthcare and health and illness is complicated, and hard feelings are a natural reaction to the situation. So if you notice those things, each of these new statements really kind of give you a little bit more space between you and the hard thing. There's just a little bit more room to breathe there. And that really just that little bit more room to breathe and that little pivot really makes a big difference from defense to care. So next, the next example is that criticism or that kindness piece. So we went through mindfulness, and now the second one was kindness. So the defense system would have us be pretty critical, that it's that fight piece. I'm failing as a partner. I don't have things together. I'm so disorganized. I'm not good at this job. So if we're able to kind of make that shift from I'm failing as a partner, I'm doing the best that I can in a really hard situation. I don't have things together and I'm so disorganized. I can imagine even, I mean, I hope that we've all had a loving, kind person say, oh, you're doing a lot right now. It's easy to get things mixed up. Stuff happens. You're doing a lot. It's not an excuse, but it's an absolutely valid reason. Just showing yourself that extra kindness and grace. I'm not good enough at this job. I work hard and I care a lot. I'm doing the best that I can, and that's enough. So, again, this kindness versus criticism, this is really just giving yourself a little bit more space in between and some breathing room and shifting the language from this identity, this critical identity, to, hey, I'm a human and I'm doing the best that I can. And that's plenty. Lastly, when we talk about common humanity, this one kind of feels a little tricky because we don't really talk about common humanity a lot. What is that? So, common humanity is the component of self-compassion that reminds us that suffering and hardship are universal experiences. Everyone experiences some type of hardship. Everyone falls on hard times or gets ill. Not in the same way. In those ways, it's very individualized, but the experience of suffering is not unique. Folks do it all the time. And the defense system would then have someone who's going through a hard time really feels isolating. Sometimes this can be the flight piece or the freeze piece, like you just feel like you can't move or you're running away from the situation, feeling like you're just the only one that's going through this. And so statements in that mindset might sound like no one knows what this is like, or dealing with my problems is a burden and I don't want to bother other people about it. I just don't know. You're freezing. I just don't know what to do or how to change this situation. And if we change our language a little bit and recognize the common element is everyone goes through hard times and I'm doing the best that I can. We're all human. We all struggle in different ways. I know people who love and care about me and that might want to help. And so, again, it's recognizing that you are not alone in these situations. It's really kind of putting a pin in that isolation. Everyone feels helpless sometimes. It's okay to feel this way and not to have the perfect answer. that one's really tough to I tend to find in my experience and in my practices that um, leaning on others, and I know people that want to help, actually making that happen is hard. And then secondly, it's okay not to have the perfect answer. Those are the two things that I notice quite a bit. So I've been thinking, this is a really important piece, cornerstone of my work and what I've seen with both in palliative care and then also in private practice as a therapist. And so I'm interested really in what this can look like over time. Um, I was recently just kind of thinking through some ideas about time, because as we all know, with a chronic and terminal illness, that time is a very unique to each individual, right? And it means something quite different to each person. And so if we think about, usually when we think of time, we think of it as kind of as linear. So it goes in a line. We have a timeline. This happens, and then this happens, and then this thing happens. But really, I'm wondering if we really grow around events of things that happen in our lives. And rather than this idea of going backwards in time, like when a trauma or an event comes up again, or a challenge comes up again, and we think, man, didn't I just get through this? Didn't I just get over this? And now it's come back. Um, Rather than going backwards in time, I'm wondering if we are able to maybe integrate our experiences kind of in a circular way. We're not the same people that we are today that we were yesterday. We have new experiences and new knowledge. And we integrate that into the next day. Um, and so I'm wondering if maybe time, if it comes up again later, if we're able to use those ideas of the things that we've learned previously, new resources, new information. And that's really the spirit of self-compassion, is to kind of integrate these, where am I right now in this moment? And what is common about this moment? Um, and being willing to kind of experience that with kindness. So this is very philosophical, and I'll I have a demonstration, so hopefully this will help. So here's our linear timeline, and events happen right across over time. And we think about, okay, I thought I've gotten over this thing. Something happens, and we have to maybe go back and think about, this is so similar to this other thing that happened. I feel like I have to start all over. Or I feel like, I've been through this really hard thing, this trauma, and I already did this. I feel like it should be over now. I feel like I should have gotten over it by now. But really what I wonder what happens is if maybe our lives look more like kind of a tree trunk. And then when something happens, it's kind of a hash mark, or something that obstructs us. We can't go through it, but we've got to figure out a way to get around it, right? And then what happens when we get around it is we end up revisiting it and revisiting it. But every time we revisit that event, instead of going back and feeling like we have to push forward again, instead of revisiting it, our skills grow and our skills develop. And we kind of carve out a new pathway, and we can take that experience, integrate it with us, and take what we've learned from it along with us. And I just thought that this aligned really well with self-compassion and each component of self-compassion. So, for example, kindness. When a tree trunk is wounded, it looks like a tree trunk to me. So when a tree trunk is wounded, it just adjusts and it softens the material that grows around the wounded or the injured part of the tree. It softens so that it can be more flexible and malleable and grow around it. And so I wonder, and that really just aligns well with this. Let's be softer and gentler, more gentle with ourselves. Common humanity, everyone has scars. Everyone suffers. Everyone has this universal experience of hardship. The hardships itself are very different, right? But but we get to we get to bond together over our imperfections and really lean on each other for support. And mindfulness, this present moment is not a replay of the past. We're not going back in time necessarily. It's a new iteration, a new version that we end up revisiting. And we bring our skills from before with us and our resources with us. So this is a different, it's a much different mindset than what we kind of think of as linear experiences. So, in terms of creating a culture of self compassion, whether it's in your home or with your healthcare team or at your place of work, wherever it might be, just to create that kind of culture, it's important to be able to incorporate all members of the culture, all members of the community in this environment. So specifically, incorporating care partner needs into care planning discussions is critical, and making plans for respite. So it's really hard to practice self-compassion and practice those mindfulness components if you're unable to have time to do so, and forget what rest looks like. Sometimes we all forget what rest looks like. So making plans for what a respite might look like. And that could include mapping out support systems. How long I'm thinking of like a matrix situation. So, up and down might be, this is how much time I need. I need, all day long, or maybe just an hour. And then how urgent would this, what's the urgency? How soon would this person be able to help? And you can kind of make a list in your mind of people that I know that if I need to run to the grocery store for, to pick up something emergently, I know I can call my next door neighbor. Or I think I'm going to plan ahead for this respite. Who might be able to help me out for a longer period of time if I can kind of plan ahead for that? So being able to come up with those ideas with your team and map those things out. Using compassionate statements, oftentimes the hardest part is using those compassionate statements towards ourselves. But the more we practice using them with others and even saying those things out loud, it might sound kind of cheesy at first, but people really appreciate that. So being able to use those statements towards others regularly will then also kind of start to help reflect those back onto ourselves. And then I think probably one of the toughest pieces is this idea of fierce self-compassion. Self-compassion sounds kind of soft and squishy and huggy, right? Maybe a little granola. But really, self-compassion also includes important and hard things like boundaries. Saying, the apprentice Hemphill had the best quote about boundaries that I think I've ever learned of. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love both you and me simultaneously. So giving of yourself, it diminishes yourself, and being able to set a boundary and find ways, compassionate ways to plan that respite, set a boundary and say, like, this is important for my health. I was recently, I don't want to go over time. Okay. I was recently talking to someone actually this morning about just caregiving. He's caring for his wife who has ALS. And he said that when she received a diagnosis, he immediately got a gym membership and just started going on a regular basis. And they plan her care, they plan things around that. And he said that he did that in order to be able to show up in a way as a spouse, as a parent, as a partner, as a caregiver. He did that so that he could show up in a way that was important to him. And I just think that that's a beautiful and really hard example of setting some fierce, self-compassionate boundaries around time. The other thing I would offer is asking yourself some questions, like when these kind of hashes in your tree trunk come up, doing a bit of reflection and asking yourself what went well about this, even if it was hard and the results or the outcome wasn't what we wanted or expected. Surely something must have gone well, even if it's the smallest thing. Like I thought I bit my tongue pretty well, or I thought I actually did a really good job explaining what my needs are, even if the other person didn't respond reciprocally. And then kind of taking learning from that, how else can I tap into some extra kindness for myself? How can I incorporate these elements of self-compassion next time? And taking that with you to learn from it. Um, Similarly, what can we let go of? Sometimes we hold on to responsibilities or we hold on to ideas, and if there's something that you can let go of, when can you make time to really mourn or even celebrate the letting go? So those are just kind of a couple of ideas. I think I'm a little early. That's all I've got for you all today. Thank you so much for your time. I would love to have an open dialogue and have time for questions and answers.
All right, sorry for the delay. Hi, Christy. That was
Hi.
fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I have a couple questions in the chat, and I'll also ask you some of my own questions that I think will be really good conversation between the two of us that people can listen in on. So the first point I want to make is that in the chat, someone just mentioned that for them, prayer really helps. And so I think that's just a great reminder that we can individualize this for ourselves. And so I'm curious if you have seen other people individualize that in the same way, creating their own routines and rhythms that work for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Faith is such a strong piece of who we are as individuals and particularly how we cope in times of distress. And so, whether you're a person with a strong faith base or you are seeking faith or not, all of those. Sometimes faith isn't necessarily specifically about a religion, but there are definitely spiritual even components. Like meditation can be quite spiritual, and so even a self practice is really, really powerful in helping you kind of reflect on how to make these pivots, and they get easier and easier over time. I'll also say that just in past experiences, setting those compassionate priorities and those boundaries around, well, what's the one thing, if I only get to do one thing for myself. I've had some caregivers that have said a weekly church gathering or a weekly support group meeting. Those are their one things, and we do everything possible to make those things happen.
Awesome. We just had another question in the chat, asking how to give yourself permission for self-compassion and boundaries and all these things that might be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around.
Yeah, I mean, I love the language there. I mean, that's really what it is giving yourself permission. I will say if you can't give yourself permission, if that's something that you're really struggling with, um, I would offer, take this right now as permission. I will give you permission to be kind to yourself and compassionate toward yourself. Um, and then when you forget about me in this talk, think about, hopefully not everything in it, but think about, maybe a childhood version of yourself, or not even necessarily childhood, but even if it's like an aspirational version of yourself. I want to be the kind of person who is compassionate towards myself. What would a compassionate person say or do in this moment? And then don't let it be a choice. Do that thing.
Absolutely. Okay, going on to the next question, and this kind of goes back to what others would say to you is, do you have recommendations or tools for people who might have a difficulty in figuring out what they're feeling? So someone might be thinking, I feel so guilty for relying on my partner, or I feel like I'm a bad caregiver. How can they identify the core feeling rather than blaming themselves?
Yeah. Oh, Man, that's so hard and that's so deep. Guilt is really kind of more of a surface level emotion. There's usually something underneath there. And that's usually something tied to maybe your identity. Why do you feel guilty that your partner is helping you? Um, and I would wonder kind of what does it mean to be a good partner, and what does that look like in times of distress or in difficult seasons? Um, what does being a good partner look like? And are we doing those things? Um, the other thing that maybe I would offer is, of course, if you have access to a clinician, a social worker, a therapist, I would offer to reach out to that person. Um, I'm a I'm a book. I don't want to say junkie, but I'm a glutton for books.
A bookworm. A bookworm.
Yeah. I'm a glutton for books and
I love that.
podcasts. And to be honest, sometimes this sounds very counterintuitive, but sometimes um, it helps to hear other people's stories and other people's narratives and hard times, not just to create that like relationship, but then also to see how their minds have worked in addressing their own guilt or their own crises. And so I think there's a podcast called, it's not specific to illness necessarily, but there's a podcast called Thanks for Asking. um, and I think there's a catalog of episodes. They might have made a shift and now it's just called Thanks for Asking. I'm not sure, but um, they it's not necessarily specific to illness, but regular people tell their stories and talk about their experiences in hard times. It could be with an illness, it could be with a divorce, it could be with an LGBTQIA person coming out and it not going well. But listening to how others are kind of connecting with the rest of the world and a larger thing can help with that also.
Amazing. Speaking of connection, I did want to ask and expand on this. You had mentioned we talked about isolation versus connection,
Hmm.
and I immediately thought of all the people with PSP, CBD, or MSA who are having to change their relationships, which goes to our last panel, actually. Do you have
Mm.
suggestions on how to kind of begin the conversations of those changing dynamics? Does that question make sense?
Say more. I'm going to go back to
So,
that slide.
perfect. So thinking, we all have community in our own way, shape, or form. It looks different for everyone.
Mhm.
But with a diagnosis like this, it changes and community is going to change. And I'm curious if you have thoughts on how to morph community, whether it's intentionality in conversation
Mhm.
or reaching out proactively. But I'm curious how you see people kind of morph their community to prevent isolation in times of change like this.
Yeah. That's a wonderful question. Communities do shift and change over time, as do our boundaries. And so I don't think that that's any coincidence. I think the two things go hand in hand, right? We have our community and the people we surround ourselves with, and then we have kind of the line in the sand that we surround ourselves with, like ourselves as individual. Um, and so I would say step one would be who has been there. Take kind of an inventory of who's been there, regardless of the season,
Mm,
regardless of the event that's happening, who's been there over time. Um, and is that person someone that can continue to be there now? That might be step one. And then step two would be, I think, leaning into a new community. It's tough to say step out of your comfort zone, but if that person can then help you, if that person that's been involved in your life can then help you kind of make connections, that can be helpful if you feel comfortable reaching out and being kind of outgoing in that way. Go for it. Um, and the other thing, you know, communities are often, when they shift and change, I think that they really reflect where we are in our season in this moment. Um, and giving yourself again permission and really recognizing that the loss of a community or the loss of people that maybe you thought would have been by you, giving yourself permission to grieve those losses and then celebrate new connections.
Mhm.
Um, that is emotional work, and it's okay to be sad and really grieve the shift in community.
Mhm. Awesome. Thanks. That's helpful to even just hear out loud. Someone in the chat, this is just a make sure everyone heard this, and I'm curious if you've heard of this, Christy. The self-compassion RAIN method taught by Tara Branch. Okay, I just wanted to shout that out. Someone in the chat said that, so I want to make sure it was heard by everyone, but it sounds like a great resource.
Yeah, it is. Tara Brock is absolutely wonderful. And she, I think, also has a podcast. They do tend to be a little long, but she does a really great job like diving deep into these ideas beyond self-compassion, but really, yeah, she's fantastic.
Great. And then last, if I can ask you go back to the slide where it was the defense to care, like the original.
So much
Doing
animation.
great.
There we
This is
go.
awesome. Okay, great. You did go over this, but I'm curious in summarization with like the last few minutes we have of how we can move from defense to care within ourselves, within relationships, if you have any just rec like logistical, practical recommendations on moving from defense to care, whatever that looks like.
Yeah. I wish that I could create a different visualization because I know that there's a break between the two systems, but really I think that it's appropriate to have them kind of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and giving yourself space to kind of oscillate between the two. Sometimes we really we develop these systems because we need them, right? These are survival. If a bear is chasing you, you are not going to be compassionate towards it. You're going to run, or you're going to fight, or you're going to play dead. And so I think in terms of relationships and really making these movements and these shifts, recognizing when you're in it and you're saying, gosh, am I feeling defensive, or am I feeling going back to this guilt component, am I fighting something about the situation, or can I really kind of lean further, and can I make that cognitive shift to being more kind toward myself?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so really just recognizing where you are, that mindfulness piece is really foundational. So really just kind of taking a moment and a breath, recognizing where you are, and being willing to talk to folks about that. One thing that I've learned is that apologies can be very powerful. And so when we're in those defense states, when you can recognize that you're really in this fight, flight, or freeze, say, I'm really sorry. I made a mistake in shutting you out, or hey, I'm really sorry that I'm making that, my feelings have just kind of become the situation. How can we do this together? I'd love your help and your feedback. People love helping each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think leaning into that is really helpful.
Yeah, I love your point about saying it out loud. Sometimes for me personally, when I'm feeling something, just saying it out loud and apologizing is a good catalyst. I like that a lot. It kind of propels you forward. Take
Yeah.
it.
And apologize to yourself and forgive
Yeah,
yourself.
yeah, that's big.
Both of all those things are true.
Yeah. Kindness to yourself and others. I love that. Well, I'm just making sure we don't have any more questions. Let's see. Sorry, we do have one more question I want to go over. Um, this one's about boundaries, and we could talk about boundaries forever. And I know we're at 3 o'clock, but
I love
just
boundaries.
a couple seconds on protecting your own peace is the phrase
Mhm.
that was used. But yeah, just making sure you're standing firm on your boundaries. Any suggestions on that before we close out?
Yeah, so boundaries aren't necessarily, the purpose of boundaries is not to shut others out necessarily. It's being the gatekeeper of who you allow in and how.
Mm,
And so really, rather than saying, like, for example, you can't do this, like pointing a finger and saying, like, you can't do this and making it a control statement about someone else's behavior, making it about yourself and saying, I can't allow people to talk to me that way. I don't allow people, I don't allow that kind of behavior, or I don't allow um, that space in my calendar to be taken up, and really making it about this is about you and your behavior and what you're in control of. And really that gives you so much more, it can give you so much more kind of motivation and insight into what it is you're protecting.
Mhm.
And if your peace is that, then you're protecting your peace.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have found too that it's a domino effect in a positive way that somebody tends to admire the fact that you're standing up for yourself too. It
Yeah.
feels scary,
Yeah. I
but
get the word confident a lot. Like
Mhm.
people think that you're confident, or people think that you're strong or whatever. And it's like, well, I'm protecting my peace.
Yeah, yeah, and hopefully it encourages others. Okay,
Yeah.
Christy, I feel like we could talk all day, but so appreciate your time today. And others, feel free to reach out to info@curepsp.com for other questions, .org, excuse me. And we can hopefully connect you to the answers and resources you're seeking. So, Christy, thank you so much.